Hattie Shasta College, Humanities 4, Film Studies. How's it going? It is Wednesday, the middle of the week. This will be the last lecture for this week because we're going into our spring break next week. I'll probably sign another assignment. Yes, you'll have to do it in the next day or so. I'll assign it, but you have plenty of time to do it. It'll be another essay. And when we come back after a week, we're going to have about 4 more weeks of school, and that's it. So we're winding down, and so please keep up with your journals. You've seen the examples. That's what they should look like. If you have any questions, you know how to get a hold of me. Don't wait to the last minute to do the journals. You will forget everything that's been spoken in here, and you might not know it, but you probably need the 10 points. I'm halfway done grading the quizzes. My last lecture, I gave the answers I was looking for. There are other answers, by the way. I was just giving you a general overall what you could have answered on how the culture influenced these filmmakers, how the filmmakers influenced the culture, and what made the era of those new directors come to an end. And I thought I was as specific as I could get. Um, I gave an example. Women's movement was one influence that influenced these filmmakers. Uh, there's a lot of other things: civil rights, Vietnam War, the politics, what was going on in the White House with Richard Nixon. The draft. This is all affecting that generation of filmmakers who were very influenced by the culture that they lived in. The Kennedys' assassinations, all the Kennedys, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, the changing of the times from the very conservative 50s to the very rock and roll hippie 60s, was influencing these filmmakers. They'd also gone to film schools, and they were learning from the French New Wave and from the Italian neorealism and from old John Ford and Hitchcock films. Peter Bogdanovich, who just died this year, who was of this generation, he's mentioned in that documentary. He directed The Last Picture Show. Was very, very, very influenced by people like Howard Hawks and John Ford, Alfred Hitchcock, Orson Welles. These are icons of American filmmaking. Other directors like Robert Altman, who directed MASH, and Nashville, and Long Goodbye, and McKay and Mrs. Miller, was very influenced by the French New Wave, by Kurosawa films coming out of Japan, Rashomon, Seven Samurai, etc. So these filmmakers had a more of an international take, and so that was influencing them also. And you could have written on any of that; that'd have been fine. Uh, how they influenced the culture coming back at us. I already mentioned this the other day, but uh, Hollywood had lost the youth market. They didn't know how to relate to them, their music, their style of dress, everything that went along with being 25 and younger. But these filmmakers, who were roughly in that age group, um, knew because it was their generation that they're making their films for. And so you'd go to see a movie like Easy Rider, Five Easy Pieces, The Graduate, uh, McCabe and Mrs. Miller, The Long Goodbye, Shampoo, and you saw something up on the screen you related to in the audience. And the issues that you were going through as an audience member was up on the screen, and that influenced the people in the audience. Um, it wasn't just drug use that influenced everybody. Everybody didn't see drug use because there's very little drug use in any of these films. Very little. Most of them have none. Yes, Easy Rider had some marijuana smoking. They were selling drugs to pay their way across the continent. But Chinatown, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, these iconic 70s films, there was nobody doing cocaine and having a rock and roll lifestyle. None, zero. Yes, it did that there was that element there, no doubt about it. It affected some more than others. Martin Scorsese was almost ruined by his use of drugs. Absolutely. But he wasn't influencing the audience to go take a bunch of drugs. Look at Taxi Driver. You want to avoid everything to do in that movie. You don't want to be any of those characters. They were showing a dark side of the American culture, and the youth market related to it because that's what they were living, the dark side of the culture. And that's the acceptable answer, one of them. And the era came to an end, a couple of reasons. Mostly it came to an end because the Hollywood studios, after Jaws and Star Wars, they figured out they can make those kind of movies without the input of these young upstart egomaniac auteur directors telling them what sells and what doesn't. They knew what sells, and it was B movie, melodrama, big budget B movies. And that started the era right then and there when box office became more important than content of the film itself. It's hard to write a serious essay on some of the films that came out in that era, like Jaws. Fine entertainment, not taking anything away from it. It was exciting, but it wasn't on a deep level that Five Easy Pieces or McCabe and Mrs. Muller were. Okay. The other reason why it came to an end, uh, studios took back control. Plain and simple. They knew what was going to sell, and what they wanted to sell was tickets, not content. And that they were off to the races. So their era came to an end. And the whole era lasted from roughly 69 to 79. So that was that. That's the quiz. I'm repeating myself here. But I'm in the middle of grading the quizzes, and I keep repeating and repeating what I was looking for. Sometimes I got it, sometimes I didn't. Oh well. For those of you who are going to need it, and some of you are going to need it, I will be assigning after the break a bonus, an extra essay. It'll be worth 10 points. It'll be in a movie you don't want to watch. Or maybe I'll make a movie you want to watch to see how you change. A movie you actually admire. Huh, that's interesting. I never thought about doing that. If anybody's listening to this, shoot me out some emails. Tell me what movies you admire you'd like to write about in a critical way, not just a thumbs up review type of thing. You know what I'm looking for by now. Okay, so today we're coming out of the 70s and we're going into the glorious 80s. Things have changed now, Hollywood. The studios are firmly back in control. The young upstart directors either work for them or they hit the road. And they continued to work for them. Nobody lost their career. Nobody's career is destroyed by this. I'm still fighting a head cold and cough. Sorry. All those independent directors who stormed the gates of Hollywood in the 70s now were hired hands. Yes, Scorsese went on to make some of his greatest films ever. Steve Spielberg did too, although he's a studio guy all the way. He's not a rebel, folks. And you can tell by his films. By the way, safe, entertaining films in the style of Frank Capra. He is audience friendly to the utmost. So these directors continue to work, but the films are changing. And Jaws and Star Wars changed everything in that the popularity was so off the chart and they made so much money, studios wanted to repeat it. Thus, we have Star Wars 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then we have the prequels 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and now we have the cartoon show, and then we got the sequels, endless sequels, prequels. We got series on Hulu. Star Wars is in the lexicon of American culture. George Lucas, his genius wasn't as a filmmaker. He's an okay director, believe it or not. He's just an okay director, but he was a visionary, and he saw the, the future of filmmaking wasn't making a French New Wave film or Italian neorealism film. It was to make a escapism film, a swashbuckler, a western in outer space, and he's been doing that for 50 years now. Selling more toys than we could ever imagine. Toys, pajamas, bedroom sets, whatever. Steve Spielberg continued with some of his better films in the 80s. Close Encounters of the Third Kind. That's about 78, I think. It was a very mature work. It's my favorite film of his. Once again, in the science fiction area. But he went on to do Saving Private Ryan, and his most recent film I just watched, I wasn't happy with it, sorry, West Side Story. He redid the musical. Have you seen it yet? Were you familiar with the story? Had you seen the original movie? Came out in 61. Have you heard the music before? Great music by Leonard Bernstein and Stephen Sondheim doing the lyrics. The new one is more urban, real. It's not so. It's not so. It's based in reality, which I think kind of makes it a downfall. That's just me. It didn't, that's just my opinion. I think that musical works because it is a romantic fantasy. But the new movie is all about urban renewal and blacks against whites and whites against Puerto Rican and Puerto Rican against themselves. And so it has all the new them versus they, us versus them, and has all the new Me Too movement that we have now that they try to instill into it. I think that's the weakness of the film, but that's just me, folks. I'm not Steve Spielberg. I teach at a community college, and he is a billionaire living the good life. Anyway, but we had some other movies coming up, like Rocky, really enjoyable, good movie. And then Rocky 2, Rocky 3. I think there's been 5 of them, maybe. And then we had Rambo 1, 2, 3. First Rambo, First Blood, really good action film with Sylvester Stallone. And then they've repeated that. I think he just did another one. He's 75 years old. He did another, Rambo. Yeah, he's in good shape, folks. That's the Hollywood myth. And plus, that's what steroids will get you. But those were his business successes. He knows that if they make another one, even though they might get other actors and they're younger actors, it's going to make enough money. The critics are going to kill it probably, but they don't care. We have the first Superman movies with the tragic Christopher Reeves, who made 2 or 3 of them. And from the Superman comics, we'd had Superman in our culture since before Hitler was in power. Well, while Hitler was in power, and then there were serials in the 40s and 50s. There's a TV series. Superman has been in our American psyche for a long time, 80, 90 years, from comic books to serials to TV shows. So they made this big budget movie, and it was state of the art special effects, and had a sense of fun about it. It was kind of tongue in cheek, and that proved hugely successful. Now it's not the dark, it's not what it looks like now. Everything changes, you know this. It looks pretty simple compared to what's going on now with the special effects and the dark turn all the superheroes have taken. That's why Marvel's taken over, because Marvel specializes in superheroes like Spider-Man and Wolverine who are flawed heroes. They aren't your usual hero. Like Superman, he's the ultimate hero. Uh, but Marvel took a dark side, and that's their films have proved way more popular than DC has. DC tries to copy it now. With The Dark Knight is so dark. It's it's dark. It's literally physically dark, folks. Uh, that franchise was started in the '80s uh, by Tim Burton of all people. Uh, First couple episodes are really excellent, by the way, in my opinion. Not just me, folks. Others. So there's this trend going on. Then we got kind of silly movies like Goonies and Gremlins, puppets, misbehaving puppets. That is all coming out of the Disney and Steve Spielberg sensibilities. All of a sudden, we're in that world again, and they were losing the audience that they gained in the '70s, which was the college graduated audience who needed something substantial, more substantial than Gremlins. And so they were losing that audience, but they're getting another audience that were weaned on these shows like Star Wars 1, 2, 3, 4, and they wanted this stuff, and they started playing video games. Yes, even in those days, there was primitive video games, and all of a sudden, the audience switched. They became younger and repeat. They would go back to these movies over and over and over again. Uh, and that's where the big money was, and that's maybe where it is still is. Anyway, so then we have, uh, then there's a movie like Top Gun that comes in there and just Tom Cruise being the traditional hero. Uh, he's going to save the day. He's going to get the girl because Tom Cruise always saves the day. He always gets the girl. And now they just made another one. He's pushing 60, but he's still saving the day. He's still probably getting the young girl now. I don't have any desire to see it. You guys see it. Tell me if you like it. Uh, and then, of course, he made his Mission Impossibles. It's all about the sequels and the franchises and how much money they can make off that. And let me tell you, folks, big bucks. Give you an example. When they first did Batman, Jack Nicholson, of all people, Academy Award winning, the '70s icon of Easy Rider and Five Easy Pieces and Chinatown, and won the Academy Award for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. He's playing the Joker in a cartoon movie. And they came to him, they offered him $20 million. Okay. I don't know about you. That's hard to turn down. But he was financially smart, had a bunch of advisors, and he was probably already wealthy. So he said, I don't want $20 million. I want 10% of the gross. And they readily gave it to him because they thought they were going to save themselves money. Well, it became such a huge hit. He made close to something like $100 million off that movie. Now, actors instead of directors are starting to be the main driving force of these movies because now somebody like Tom Cruise, Bruce Willis, Harrison Ford, who is making endless sequels, Indiana Jones is another one, are making so much money, they're taking the credit for it. It's me that's up there. That's why people are coming. It's not the director like it used to be. It's not the auteur director because nobody directs me. That's true. It's hard to direct Tom Cruise. It's hard to direct Harrison Ford. So in the '80s, it started to turn, the actors started controlling the product. And the studios were willing to pay whatever it took. And they paid. Let me tell you, folks, with back end deals, front end deals, Johnny Depp kind of jump on the shark here in the 90s with all the Pirates of the Caribbean. Made a fortune. He lost a fortune too. Just didn't know how to hang on to his money. The suddenly star system became the driving force. Writer directors became who they hired. The actors are hiring the directors now. Somebody they want to work for, someone who's going to make them look good. Not make the best movie, folks, but to make them look awesome. In the midst of all this, there's a little tiny revolution going on. They're poking their heads up and be the first of the indie films. Remember, the word indie, we're going to talk about it in depth when we get back from our break, because indies really took off in the early 90s. The Sundance Film Festival changed everything, but we're not there yet. So, New York filmmaker by the name of Jim Jarmusch came out with a film that he made on next to nothing, $50,000-$60,000, which is not very much money, folks. Black and white, 16 millimeter, called Stranger in Paradise, and it got released. That's the miracle of that movie. It got released into theaters. I saw Stranger when I lived in LA. I saw Stranger in Paradise in a Beverly Hills Cineplex. It was playing along with Top Gun and Goonies, and there's Stranger in Paradise, this little quirky, offbeat black humor film. I'm going to post preview, so look at it in modules, will you? I'll post that later on today, tomorrow, and people got up and noticed. He's essentially an underground filmmaker from New York. Had gone to film school there. He had a couple of key connections, and his movie got made. He used musicians to act in his movie. They were unknown people. Nobody knows who they were. I know who they are, but I didn't know who they were. Had no clue. They some of them, not all of them, but John Laurie, who starred in it, went on to do several films. One of my favorite Jim Jarmusch's movies called Down by Law. He's in that. He was the saxophone player for a punk rock band called the Lounge Lizards that came out in New York City in the late 70s or 80s. I'm reading his book right now, actually. He's my age and he's still out there, but he's an artist now. He's painting. Anyway, so another writer, director, auteur, filmmaker by the name of John Sayles made his first movie. He had sold some scripts to Hollywood, kind of low budget horror films like Piranha. Actually, it's a pretty good movie, and others. And so he got enough money to put away 80, 90 grand, and he made his own movie on 16 millimeter called The Return of the Secaucus 7. It's about the reunion of these college chums. I think they meet after 10 years. If you know the movie The Big Chill, it's kind of the predecessor of The Big Chill. Very similar. These guys went to school together, and now they're getting aging together. Yeah, they're all 30 years old. They're aging. And, very well thought out, emotional film done in the indie style, meaning it was kind of racy, had good music. There's some nudity thrown in there, marijuana smoking, good stuff. And then he had a great run in the 80s. Hasn't made a movie in a while that I know of. I'm sure you can Google it. You can find out what he's been doing. But in the 80s, he was pretty much forerunner of the independent movie scene. I will put up a preview of that so you can see what the hell I'm talking about. Later on, a little later on in the 80s, Spike Lee, African American filmmaker from Brooklyn, made his first film, She's Gotta Have It, and it changed the course of history once again. Not only is this an African American black filmmaker, which was rare in the indie scene. It's rare in any scene besides the black exploitation films, but it was a smart, well thought out, funny slice of life set in Brooklyn. He went on to, he's still directing. He's, you probably know Spike Lee. His films uh, could be inspiring and they could be frustrating like anybody else. But he also makes commercials for Nike. That's how he makes a lot of money from those commercials. He also teaches at NYU Film School. Anyway, so Spike Lee was making inroads. His name was getting talked about, but the big studios have. I don't know. I'd have to really research it. The big studios still kind of stay away from him because he's not that commercial, and so they don't like that. He's not going to make Superman Part 3. Okay. Uh, anyway, and the other director, where is he here? Is David Lynch. Now, I would say David Lynch is probably the most successful out of this bunch here. Uh, David Lynch made his student film. Took him 10 years to make it, called Eraserhead. I'm going to show. I'm going to post a preview for that. Really an offbeat, dark comedy about a guy living in kind of a hellish existence. It's really quite brilliant and original. And it took him years to make it. He finally got it released, and people were blown away by it. And then he got a big contract in Hollywood to direct a movie called Elephant Man, based on a famous play. And Mel Brooks, the producer, maybe you've heard of him, producer, actor, writer, director guy who did The Producers and so many more other movies and plays and musicals. He really loved Eraserhead. He saw a lot of potential there, and he went on a limb and hired him for this very offbeat film, filmed in black and white, with John Hurt and Anthony Hopkins. Elephant Man is based on a real guy who had a horrible deformed disease that resembled an elephant of all things. He must have kept this is a real guy. He mostly kept a gunny sack over his head so people wouldn't have to see the hideousness of his existence. It's a heartbreaking uh, human film. Anthony Hopkins, but is his doctor trying to make his life better somehow. This is long. It's set in the. I think it's set in the 19th century or early 20th century. So the medical community is limited what they could do to him. Anyway, it's a heartbreaking film, but it is a Hollywood film. And then later on, they hired David Lynch to do Dune, not the new Dune that just came out, which I actually want to see, but I don't have the streaming service for that yet. Have you seen Dune? What'd you think of it? Anyway, he made a stab at Dune, and it was a huge failure. He's the wrong director for it, and you go to it. It's kind of embarrassing. It really is. Sting, you know the rock star Sting. He's in it. Kyle MacLachlan, who David Lynch uses him a lot, mostly in his TV series called Twin Peaks and Blue Velvet. Yeah. Anyway, then after that, Lynch had to lick his wounds and go back to making offbeat indie films like Blue Velvet and the rest. He doesn't really want to make movies anymore. I don't blame him. The last thing he did was the HBO brought back Twin Peaks. Maybe you saw it. I don't know how many. I saw an episode or two in a hotel room. I didn't care for it. I thought that he was trying to be too esoteric, too kooky, wacky, but it's still his own vision. One thing about David Lynch, he sticks to his own vision. He's fierce that way and has somehow eked out a very admirable career. And there's probably more to come from him. We'll see. He says he's done with movies, but we'll see. Anyway, those are the four directors in this doldrums of 80 sequels that kind of gave film people, serious film people like myself and others, hope. Movies are still being made. And then in Spain, we had Pedro Almodovar starting his great series of intense women films, Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down, Women on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown. And so you had to start looking in the 80s in the global village. You had to go outside of Hollywood if you wanted to look at serious films that were maybe saying something to you as an audience, something you needed that Goonies or Superman 2 didn't give you. Uh, pardon me. Anyway, that's it. I'm going to shut up. It's stressing me out to talk any further. Keep up the good work, guys. Did you see the chapters I asked you to read? Uh, it's I think it's chapter 8, but it kind of takes over this period where we just got done talking about up until kind of like what I'm talking about now in the book, the textbook. I think starts on 329. Just read the end of the chapter. It's 50, 60 pages. You're going to love it. And it's going to cover films that I just don't have time enough to cover in here without overwhelming you with too many factoids, which I don't want to do. Anyway, look for the next assignment. Try to enjoy your break. Do something good. Give back. Don't be selfish. I'm saying this to myself too. Watch a good movie. Let it wash over you and see if it affects you. Just don't watch it on your cell phone when you're busy in between classes or at the coffee shop with a bunch of interruptions. Watch it. Let it consume you. And tell me how you feel about it. All right, that's it for this week. Remember two things: everything is cinema, and the story of film will continue.